The first call came in as a whisper, a strange, breathless sound that was almost swallowed by the static on the line. I thought it was a prank, one of those late-night jokes from a friend with a twisted sense of humor. My name is Elara Vance, and at the time, I was a young architect, fresh out of my master's program, living in a charming but creaky old brownstone in Boston. The kind of place with a spiral staircase that groaned under your weight and windows that rattled with every gust of wind. It was a place full of echoes, but that night, the echo was coming from my phone. The voice on the other end, barely audible, said only 3 words. "He's not what he seems." The call ended abruptly, leaving me with a dial tone that felt colder and more hollow than usual. My first thought was of my fiancé, Ethan. He was the complete opposite of the voice, warm, reliable, and utterly devoted. We had met in a tiny coffee shop near Harvard Square, both of us huddled over sketchbooks, and it felt like fate. He was a history professor, a man who spoke of ancient civilizations and forgotten heroes with a passion that made my heart race. He had a way of looking at me that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. Our life together was a perfect, sun-drenched painting, and this anonymous, eerie call was a smudge on the canvas. I laughed it off, told myself it was some drunk wrong number, or maybe a prank from my friend, Liam, who always said Ethan was too perfect. But the words lingered, a tiny, insistent pebble in my shoe. The next day, the second call came. This time, there was no voice, only the sound of a woman weeping, a heart-wrenching, silent sob that I recognized from a place I couldn't put my finger on. It sounded like pure, unfiltered grief. The calls continued, always from a blocked number, always just a sound. A shard of glass hitting a tiled floor, a distant train whistle, the slow, rhythmic drip of water. Each one a piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was supposed to be solving. Ethan noticed my distraction. He would catch me staring at my phone, a faraway look in my eyes. "Everything okay, Elara?" he would ask, his voice a comforting rumble. "Just stress from work." I'd lie, not wanting to worry him with something so irrational. He'd smile, a gentle, reassuring smile that could melt glaciers. He was the rock I leaned on, the anchor in my chaotic world of deadlines and design critiques. How could I even begin to entertain the idea that this man, this beacon of kindness and stability, could be hiding something? The thought was absurd. But the calls, and now strange occurrences, began to accumulate. One evening, I was organizing Ethan's study, a room I rarely entered out of respect for his privacy. He was very particular about his books, his maps, his perfectly arranged collection of Roman coins. As I dusted his desk, I noticed a small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath a stack of history papers. It wasn't his usual academic notebook. The cover was worn, the pages inside filled with a frantic, angular script that wasn't his neat, professorial handwriting. I hesitated, my hand hovering over it. Curiosity, a powerful and dangerous thing, won out. I opened it to a random page. The words were a jumble of dates and names, but one name jumped out at me, Caroline. Beneath it, a line was scrawled, "She knows. She has to be stopped." A cold dread pooled in my stomach. The journal was not Ethan's, that much was clear. The handwriting, the dark tone, the desperate urgency. It was a stark contrast to the man I knew. I closed the book quickly, shoving it back where I found it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prop for a class, a historical reenactment, a student's research project. But the feeling of wrongness, of a deep, unsettling disconnect, wouldn't go away. The following week, the weirdness escalated. I found an old, faded photograph tucked into one of Ethan's textbooks. It was a picture of a young woman, a brunette with kind eyes and a melancholic smile. She was standing in front of a house, a beautiful, sprawling Victorian with a manicured lawn, the kind of house you see in old movies. Her smile seemed to hold a secret, a sadness that was too deep for her young face. On the back, in that same frantic handwriting from the journal, a single word was written, "Caroline." My stomach clenched. Was this the same Caroline? The one who had to be stopped? The calls, the journal, the photograph, they were no longer isolated incidents. They were threads in a tapestry I was beginning to dread. I felt a chasm opening up between the Ethan I knew and the man I was starting to suspect. He was still loving, still attentive. He'd bring me coffee in the morning, make my favorite dinner on a whim, hold my hand during movies. But now every touch felt a little different. His gentle smile seemed to hide a shadow. His reassuring words sounded a little too rehearsed. I started watching him, analyzing his movements, the way he spoke, the way his eyes would sometimes dart away when I asked a question about his past. The beautiful, sun-drenched painting of our life was beginning to fade, revealing a darker, more complex canvas underneath. I was no longer an innocent bystander. I was a detective in my own life, sifting through clues, piecing together a story I desperately hoped was not true. This was no longer a prank. It was a slow, terrifying descent into a reality I couldn't have imagined. The discovery of the journal and the photograph marked a point of no return. My life with Ethan, once a tranquil lake, had been disturbed by a stone, and the ripples were spreading. The calls, which had momentarily ceased, started again with a new, more terrifying intensity. This time there was a voice, a woman's voice, strained and hoarse, whispering in a shaky cadence. "Elara, please, he's a monster, he." The call would always cut out before she could finish. It was a cruel, psychological torture, a ghost trying to communicate with me from beyond a veil of static and fear. I knew now with a gut-wrenching certainty that these calls were real, that they were directed at me, and that they had something to do with Ethan. The suspicion, once a quiet doubt, now screamed in my mind. I found myself becoming a stranger in my own home. I would find myself searching for more clues, my hands trembling as I sifted through his things. The study became a forbidden vault, a place I had to tiptoe into when he was away, my heart pounding like a drum. The more I looked, the more I found. A small, locked box hidden in the back of his sock drawer. I had to use a hairpin to pry the flimsy lock open. Inside, there was no treasure, but a collection of ID cards, all with different names, different faces, but all sharing one haunting feature. His eyes. Ethan's eyes, staring back at me from a half-dozen different lives. John Smith, Michael Jones, David Miller, the names were generic, the photos subtly altered, but the core of the man was undeniable. He wasn't just Ethan. He was a phantom, a chameleon, a man with 100 faces. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The man I was set to marry, the man I had shared my life with for 2 years, was not who he said he was. The beautiful, peaceful life we had built was a house of cards, built on a foundation of lies. The calls, the photo, the journal. They weren't just random events. They were breadcrumbs, a trail left for me by someone who knew the truth, someone who wanted me to find it. I confronted him, not directly, but with a question that danced around the truth. "Ethan," I began, my voice a nervous tremor, "did you ever live in Oregon?" I chose the location on one of the fake IDs. His face, for a brief, terrifying moment, went blank. The easy, relaxed smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold, calculated stillness. "Oregon? No, why do you ask?" he said, his voice level, but his eyes were like two dark, empty wells. I stammered, "Oh, just, a friend mentioned it. I thought it was a coincidence." The moment passed, but the air between us had grown thick and heavy with unspoken secrets. He knew I was fishing for something, and I knew he was hiding something monumental. The tension in the house was palpable. Our perfect, sun-drenched painting was now a storm-lashed ship, and the storm was coming from within. I found myself jumping at every sound, every late-night shadow. I stopped answering the calls, not out of fear, but out of a desperate, irrational hope that if I ignored the truth, it would go away. But it didn't. The phantom woman from the phone calls escalated her efforts. A package arrived, an unmarked brown box, no return address. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, there was a small, dusty child's music box. I wound the key, and a tinny, haunting melody began to play. It was a familiar lullaby, one I had heard somewhere before, but couldn't place. Tucked beneath the box was a single, folded piece of paper. On it, in the same frantic handwriting from the journal, was a message. The lullaby is the key. Ask him about the fire. The fire. The word sent a shiver down my spine. I started to search for a connection. A fire, a lullaby, Caroline. The pieces were starting to fit together in a horrifying jigsaw puzzle. I began to look online, searching for news articles, historical records, anything that would connect these disparate threads. It was a needle in a haystack, but I was a woman on a mission. I was no longer afraid. I was furious. Furious at the lies, at the deception, at the man I thought I knew. My search led me down a dark rabbit hole of online forums and archived news sites. I finally found it. A small, local news story from a quiet suburb in Oregon, dated 15 years ago. A fire. A beautiful Victorian house, the one from the photograph. The article was brief, a tragic accident. The homeowner, a young woman named Caroline Hayes, had died in the blaze. A fire in her nursery. They had attributed it to faulty wiring. But something about the story didn't feel right. The description of the woman, her age, the house, it all matched. And the lullaby, a comment on the article mentioned that Caroline had been a pianist, known for composing a beautiful lullaby for her baby. The pieces were fitting, but the picture was monstrous. Ethan came home, his usual cheerful self, and I felt a surge of revulsion. How could he be so normal, so calm, when he had a whole hidden past, a whole hidden identity? I looked at him, and I saw a stranger, a man who had manipulated me, who had woven a false reality around me. He smiled at me, a loving, warm smile, and I felt a cold dread so intense it made my head spin. I had to know the truth, the whole truth, no matter how ugly it was. I was ready to push him, to break through his facade. I was a few steps away from finding the body, but I had no idea who it would be. The discovery of the news article about Caroline's death was the final push. I couldn't pretend any longer. The house, our home, now felt like a stage set for a play I was trapped in. Ethan's presence, once a comfort, was now a constant source of terror. The charming professor I knew had been replaced by a ghost from my own personal horror story. I knew I couldn't confront him without a plan, so I started digging deeper. I found more connections, more news stories, all linking him to other incidents, other tragedies, other women who had vanished or died under mysterious circumstances. It was a pattern, a dark, methodical cycle of deceit and destruction. The phantom caller, the woman who had been trying to warn me, was my only ally. I had to find her. I traced the phone number, a difficult task with a blocked caller ID, but my skills in technology, a side effect of my architecture training, paid off. The number was a burner phone, but it had been activated near a small, private hospital on the outskirts of Boston. I went there under the pretense of visiting a friend, my heart a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I showed a receptionist a picture of the woman from the photograph, Caroline. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't recognize her." But as I was leaving, a nurse, an older woman with tired, knowing eyes, stopped me. "That woman," she whispered. "She was a patient here for a long time. They called her the ghost." Her real name was Sarah Hayes, Caroline's younger sister. She had been institutionalized after a nervous breakdown 15 years ago, after the fire. She had always insisted that her sister's death wasn't an accident, that the man had done it. No one believed her. Sarah was the phantom caller, the one who had been trying to warn me. She was lucid for a few moments, just enough to tell me everything. He was a master of masks," she rasped, her hands shaking. "He dated my sister, but he was always different." And then she found out about the fire, the first one. She thought it was a prank, until she found the body. The body. The words echoed in my mind. Not a figurative body, but a real, human one. Caroline had found the body of another one of his victims, a woman he had dated years before, someone he had discarded when she got too close to his true identity. And Caroline was next. He had faked the fire to cover up her murder, making it look like an accident. He was a serial killer, a chameleon, a man who moved from town to town, from life to life, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. The truth was a tidal wave, washing away the last vestiges of the man I thought I knew. I had to get out, but I couldn't just leave. He would find me. I had to expose him. My plan was to gather as much evidence as I could, then go to the police. I knew he was getting ready to leave again. He had been packing, talking about a new job opportunity in a different state. The cycle was starting again. I returned home, my mind a whirlwind of fear and purpose. The house was quiet, too quiet. I heard a sound from the basement, a slow, rhythmic dripping. My heart hammered. I had to see. I had to know. The basement was a dusty, cobweb-filled space that Ethan never let me enter, citing a fear of spiders. He had a lock on the door, but I knew where he kept the key. A small ceramic frog on his desk. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty space. I flipped on the light switch and the single bulb cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of decay. In the center of the room, beneath a tarp, was a large wooden crate. The dripping sound was coming from inside it. I moved forward, my feet crunching on something on the floor. I bent down, my hand shaking as I picked it up. It was a small, dusty child's toy, a tiny porcelain doll with one eye missing. A toy from a nursery. The same lullaby from the music box echoed in my mind. I ripped the tarp off the crate, and the sight that greeted me was a punch to the gut. It wasn't just one body. There were two. The first was a woman, her face pale, her eyes wide with a silent scream. Her hair was a matted nest, and she was wearing a dress I recognized from the fake IDs. The second was smaller, a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, curled up in a fetal position, clutching a tiny, faded teddy bear. A single tear rolled down my cheek. The woman from the phone calls, Sarah, had been right. He was a monster, and I was standing in his lair. The lullaby wasn't for Caroline's baby. It was for the child he had taken. Another victim. An innocent life extinguished before it had even begun. This was the dark heart of his deception, the horrific secret he had been protecting. I heard the front door open upstairs. My blood ran cold. He was home. I had no time. I had to get out. I took a picture with my phone, a shaky, blurry image of the two bodies. It wasn't much, but it was proof. I scrambled back upstairs, my feet barely making a sound, just as he was walking into the living room. "Elara?" he called out, his voice a little too cheerful, a little too loud. "I'm home." I had to act normal, to pretend I hadn't just seen the true face of the man I loved. But as I looked at him, his smiling face, his kind eyes, I saw only a monster. The prank was over. The body had been found. The next few hours were a dance of terror and deception. We sat at the dinner table, the air thick with unspoken truths. I couldn't look him in the eye. Every word he spoke felt like a lie, a poison meant to lull me into a false sense of security. He talked about our future, about our wedding plans, about the new house he was looking at in another state. A house with a big, spacious basement. The words were a knife in my heart. He was already planning his next act, his next victim. I had to get away, but I knew he was watching me, his every move a calculated measure of my own. I excused myself, claiming a headache, and went to our bedroom. I locked the door and called the police, my voice a shaky whisper, my heart pounding in my throat. The dispatcher was calm, but her voice was a lifeline. "We're sending officers to your location," she said. "Stay on the line. Do not confront him." I listened to her, my hand shaking as I gripped the phone, the world a blurry haze of fear. I could hear him walking around downstairs, his footsteps echoing in the quiet house, each one a hammer blow against my sanity. He knocked on the door. "Elara? You okay?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "Just a headache," I said, my voice a strained whisper. "I need to lie down." I could hear him standing outside the door, his presence a dark, suffocating weight. I waited, holding my breath, the silence in the room stretching on and on. I was a deer in a lion's den, and the lion was waiting for me to make a move. The police arrived, their sirens a silent, beautiful symphony of hope and salvation. I heard a frantic sound downstairs, a loud thud, and then the front door slammed open. "Police! Freeze!" A voice boomed from downstairs. I waited, my breath hitched in my throat, for a gunshot, for a scream. But there was only silence. He had escaped. He was a ghost, a master of disappearing acts, and he had vanished into the night, leaving me alone in the wreckage of our life. The police investigation that followed was a blur. They found the bodies in the basement, the evidence of his crimes, the ID cards, the journals. They pieced together his history, a horrifying tapestry of manipulation, murder, and deceit. The man I knew as Ethan Vance had been living under a false identity for years, leaving a trail of broken hearts and dead bodies in his wake. His real name was Thomas Gray, a man who had faked his own death years ago to escape a prior murder charge. The woman I knew as Sarah, Caroline's sister, was a key witness, her testimony finally proving her sanity and bringing the truth to light. The lullaby they discovered was a code, a signal between him and his victims, a twisted game he played with their lives. I was a victim, too, a survivor of a psychological war waged by a man I thought I loved. The police told me he was a master manipulator, a psychopath who enjoyed the thrill of the chase, the game of cat and mouse he played with his victims. He was still out there, a shadow, a threat, a phantom who could reappear at any moment. But for now, I was safe. I moved out of the brownstone, the memories too painful, too real. I changed my name, my phone number, my life. I was no longer Elara Vance, the young architect who thought she was living a fairy tale. I was a survivor, a witness to a darkness I never knew existed. The story of the man I loved, the man who was a monster, became a cautionary tale, a ghost story whispered in the dark corners of the city. I was changed, my innocence lost, my trust shattered. I became an advocate for victims of manipulation and domestic violence, using my story to help others, to warn them about the dangers lurking beneath the surface of a perfect smile. The ghost of Thomas Gray, or Ethan Vance, or whatever name he was using, was still out there, a reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not supernatural but human. The ones who walk among us, who smile at us, who promise us the world, while they are plotting to take it all away. I'll never know if he'll ever be found, but I'll never stop looking over my shoulder. And that, I guess, is the final part of the story. If the story resonated with you, if it sent a shiver down your spine, or if it made you think, then please consider giving this video a like. And if you want to hear more stories like this, where the most terrifying secrets are the ones hidden in plain sight, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. Thank you for listening.